Support for this episode comes from Gvoke HypoPen. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you're at risk for your blood sugar going too low. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready to treat very low blood sugar with Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more. Go to gvokeglucagon.com/Stacy. That's gvokeglucagon.com/STACEY. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on top of your kidneys called pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacy Sims.
This week, she calls it the chaos lottery and says we all have different ways of dealing with whatever life throws our way. I'm talking to Sarah Stewart Holland, host of the podcast Pantsuit Politics, about her family's journey with diabetes. Her son was diagnosed almost 2 years ago. She has a lot to say about parenting a child with a chronic condition. This is not her son's first serious diagnosis. And also about roles versus identities and being a person without type 1 who's raising a person with it. It's a lot, I know. It is great. I'm really excited about bringing this to you. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. I'm your host, Stacy Sims, and I'm going to try to make this intro quick because this is a longer than usual conversation. But I really enjoyed it, and I didn't want to cut anything. This was recorded live at our Mom's Night Out Charlotte event. Remember, we will be in Chicago in April, and more Mom's Night Out events to come. You can learn more at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Mom's Night Out tab. I met Sarah Stewart Holland virtually in the spring of 2022 when my entire social media feed turned into her story. Her son had been diagnosed, and I was tagged by so many people who wanted to connect us. So thank you for that. Sarah is the co-host of Pantsuit Politics, which is a very popular show. They've got an Instagram following of more than 60,000 people. And I say that because I can't imagine what it's like to be newly diagnosed and be getting hit with so much, helpful, mostly, information from so many people, to get so much advice so publicly. So I thought it would be really interesting to hear more. Sarah is also the parent of 2 other boys. Felix, her son with type 1, is the youngest. Pantsuit Politics is an award-winning show named to the top podcast lists by Apple and the New York Times. And as I said, very big following, very popular show. I don't like to listen to a lot of political podcasts. I think many of us are a little burnt out right now, honestly, but they do a great job of, as they say, keeping it nuanced. And I do think it's a wonderful show. It is one of the few that I listen to now. I say all that to set this up. This conversation is not about politics. Sarah interviewed me a couple of months ago for her show. I will link that up in our show notes. And we talked about politics and the diversity in the diabetes community. As I told her then, my belief is you don't go into the hospital and get a diagnosis of type 1 in your family and leave with some kind of new voter registration card, right? We are a large community with lots of different political beliefs. Just one more quick note. Sarah's co-host on Pantsuit Politics is Beth Silvers, which threw me for a loop when I was introducing Sarah at the event. We have an attendee with that exact same name. And you're actually going to hear from our Beth Silvers, our local Charlotte Beth Silvers, in the Q&A portion of this panel. What's the chances? Isn't that wild? All right, here is my Mom's Night Out conversation with Sarah Stewart Holland.
Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be here. Pantsuit Politics is, I know it's confusing because politics is in the name, but we say we take a different approach to the news. So we want people to be able to listen and be informed and not feel stressed and anxious when the show is over. So we often say that we are a show for people who hate politics. Like when people are like, I hate politics, but I like your show, I'm like, well, you're our target audience. Now we do have people who are like sort of what I would term, with love, because I am one, a political rat, people who just love politics and want to consume it all the time, but that is not the majority of Americans. And so we really try to find a space for particularly women to process what's going on in the world in a way that leaves them filled up instead of depleted.
It's a great description. As I said, my feed blew up with everybody tagging, did you see this? Do you know this? Can you help them? What do you think if you were getting into the community for the first time? So you just said, I don't even remember when it happened. It must have been overwhelming, like every type 1 diagnosis is. Do you mind taking us back? What do you remember? How did Felix get diagnosed?
Felix was diagnosed after a vacation. Like a lot of kids were like, why are you going to the bathroom so much? I don't know if any of you know the Enneagram, but there is a personality test called the Enneagram. My husband is an Enneagram 6, which he lives in the worst case scenario. Makes him an excellent attorney. Also made him highly attuned to the symptoms for diabetes. I remember him saying this with my first 2 a couple times. Like he'd be like, they're peeing all the time. What if they have diabetes? I didn't even know that was a symptom, but he did because, I don't know, he probably looks up symptoms to bad diseases in the middle of the night when he can't sleep because that's his personality. And so I was like, well, it was Easter or Sunday, like Easter weekend. We'd come back from spring break in Utah and we were at Easter and we were like, well, maybe it's just all these Easter candy he's eating. And so I actually happen to have a blood glucose meter because I have a friend who's like into health and wellness. And several years earlier, she'd be like, blood sugar. We're going to take our blood sugar. It's going to change our lives. And I was like, okay, because I just do what she says. I take whatever supplement she says. I'm like, okay. But as I was telling our table, if you don't have diabetes, taking your blood glucose gets really boring really fast. And so I just was like sitting in a drawer. So I pulled it. I waited for Monday morning and I said, well, let me take your blood sugar because you've been asleep all night. And it was, I believe, 300 when he woke up. And I was like, these strips are old. These strips are definitely expired. That's definitely the problem. And then I took my blood sugar and it was like 100. And I was like, shit. He went to school. I called his pediatrician. The pediatrician was like, bring him to me after school because that'll be a long enough time after lunch. She called me. I think I saw it on my chart right before she called me. And it was 300. And I was like, ugh. So my son... That's going to make me tear up a little bit. My son also has hemiplegia. He had a stroke before he was born. And I just remember being on the phone with her and saying, he does not need one more thing. And it was so upsetting. And she was like, I remember her being like, they told me you need to come now to Vanderbilt, which is about 2 hours away. You don't have to call an ambulance. And I was like, good, because I'm not going to, because that's bananas. And so we drove to Vanderbilt. He was not in diabetic ketosis. He was on insulin by that night. He missed 1 day of school. He was back in school on Wednesday. So it was a very, as diagnoses go, not very dramatic diagnosis. I do remember we got there, they overwhelmed me with all this information, but then I got home and I'm like, what are we supposed to be feeding him? How do we count carbs? And they're like, we'll tell you later. And I was like, I remember being on the phone with the nurse and I was like, listen, I understand that some people don't want a lot of information at first. That is not me. And it's certainly not my husband. We are attorneys. Give us everything. I want a carb count now. I remember our first meal home was sushi. Dear God. He was like 500, and I was like, this will not do. And she was like, I remember the nurse being like, well, some people tell us they don't want a carb count for the first 6 months. And I was like, well, that was my reaction. So I'm glad y'all had this. That's what I said. Well, then they should not have a kid with diabetes. That's not going to work. I remember asking for the Dex because I had, to the support angle, I had Nicholas's very good friend from high school. His child had recently been diagnosed 2 years earlier. And then I had a woman in my community who was really lovely. And I had several listeners who immediately sent me their cell phone numbers and were like, text me anytime, ask me any questions. And every one of them was like, get a Dexcom immediately. I really tried to get it before we left the hospital and they kind of laughed at me. But then I didn't leave them alone and I got the Omnipod really soon. And we went to Europe 2 months later. So we had tons of support with all my listeners who would support me and our friends. And it just felt like I had this little community of mostly moms for sure saying don't freak out about this, don't let them push you out around about that, all this stuff. And so, yeah, that was the story.
It's amazing to think about how much social media has changed everything. When my son was diagnosed, we were lucky enough to be part of the JDRF community because oddly enough, I used to work in radio in Charlotte and I was the MC of the JDRF golf tournament for a couple of years. So I had one or two people.
Because you love golf.
And I do love golf. So I had one or two people I could call and say, hey, I think I met you and you seemed normal. My son has type 1. Are you around? And so we were enveloped kind of before. You remember, you were one of the people I called, Jenny Gostner. And I'm curious, though, I am one of those people who finds information overwhelming. My son was 9 before he got a continuous glucose monitor. He got the Dexcom after 7 years of diabetes. So we didn't really know any other way. When you were, I don't want to say hit with all this wonderful support, that seems like an odd verb to use, but it sounds like you're super grateful for it. It really helped. But I said 60,000 Instagram followers. Like, did you think about it before you shared on social media? Did you think you'd get the response you did?
No, I didn't. I share everything with our listeners. Here's the thing about podcasting. I mean, we have a lot of followers on Instagram. That has jumped dramatically because we had Hillary Clinton on our podcast a few months ago. So that went up like 20,000 people. On the podcast, what I tell people is like, you got to work hard to troll a podcast. You can't skim a podcast and decide you hate the person. You know what I mean? Like, you have to spend time with us. So it's sort of this like gatekeeping a little bit. And so we have a really amazing community of listeners. I trusted them. And I tell you, the experience I sort of thought could happen, but every time it just takes my breath away. So I told Felix's story of his diagnosis on the podcast. We talked about the symptoms. And probably a month later, I got my first, "Your podcast saved my child's life." Yeah. We get Christmas cards from our listeners. Like we have a P.O. box and they send us that. And this year I got a photo card and she had taken a Sharpie and drawn a picture of arrow up to him and said, "Your podcast saved his life." So I've probably gotten about 6 or 7 of those at this point. And every time I'm like, oh man, like it's like, welcome to this club. I'm so sorry you remember. But like, it's just, it's the power of that connection. And I mean, definitely the only time I think we got overwhelmed is, and our friends warned us, they were like, so there's this Facebook group called the Juice Box Podcast. Maybe don't go on there immediately. And I very rarely get overwhelmed. And I went on there and I was like, oh no. Because I'm an information person, like just bury me in information. But there was a sense of like, there was a tenor in a couple places on the internet that I was like, mm-mm. But I think that overall, just the feeling that like, you're not in it, you're not alone. And there was just such a robust community. It was very different from hemiplegia. Like there's a couple Facebook groups for that, but it's just a different experience and not as sort of supportive and not as energetic, I guess I would say. And so, I mean, it was a really great feeling, I think, for sure.
And pardon my ignorance, do you mind explaining a little bit more about what that condition is and means for him?
Yeah, my son, we think he had a stroke probably right before he was born or right after. He has reduced usage on his right side. So his arm kind of pulls up a little bit. He has that spasticity. He can use his right. I mean, he has what a lot of people in the community like wish they had. Like his is pretty high functioning. So but he wears a brace on his leg. He wears a brace at night on his arm. Anything that's bilateral, anything where you're using both hands is very, very difficult for him. And so we've had to think about that. Like as he gets older, for example, if he puts his Omnipod, if he's living alone, like he really can't put an Omnipod here because that's his strong arm and he will not have that arm strength to pull it off when it's time to remove it.
Right.
So, something like that. Or like, testing, like we looked at a couple test kits. He's kind of figured it out where he can, I mean, he will figure it out as his middle name. Like he plays video games, like he plays basketball. He gets stolen a lot, but that's okay. He has a real weak side, but he'll figure it out. And so, I mean, he'll have to figure that out with diabetes too, but the double whammy is brutal sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for explaining that. So he just sounds like the kind of kid that doesn't want to sit still. And you went to Europe, you said, which good for you, bringing your kids with you.
Yeah, we have a really great picture of my husband giving him a shot in the Swiss Alps.
Well, and that leads me to my next question. So I think so many of us in this room entered diabetes land at different times when technology was in different phases. So, for us, like I said, it was 7 years till Dexcom, and it was 6 months until we got an insulin pump. What was your technology journey?
Well, we got Dexcom really, really early because, again, I really would have walked out of the hospital with it if they left me. And so he was diagnosed in April. It was April 15th. It was like tax day. Okay, so then he got the Dexcom at the start of school in August. So we went from MDI, not Dexcom, Omnipod. We went from MDI to Omnipod 5, which I do not recommend. That was a huge jump for us. And it was all, like the first day of school, he was like, I still have trauma thinking about it, but it was a mess. So we've been on Omnipod 5 since August of 2022. Yeah. We went to a pump. I mean, I remember emailing the doctor and saying like, because there had been a clinic that had closed. They had all these patients. They were going to make us wait to get the talk about what types of pods that they had. And I was like, listen, help me help you. Don't make me wait to come to a thing when I know what we want to do. Like, I want the Omnipod 5. You know we can handle it. Just get out of my way. She was like, okay. We have a great doctor. She does not have a big ego and does not mind when I'm like, can we do this? And she's like, fine. And so that way it worked really, really well. I mean, we fight with the Omnipod 5 a lot, talking about loop.
Well, let me ask you about that, because I'm curious. And again, I'm going to be nosy. She doesn't have to answer everything I say, right? We get this. We know how this works. But I am curious. I always thought it would be easier going from MDI to a smart pump rather than, I don't know about you guys, like using a dumb pump.
Well, it's not that smart is the problem.
Well, wait a minute. Using a dumb pump for a long time and then going to a smart pump, it's really hard, right? Because sometimes you're like, I just want to push all the buttons.
I think it was because we did not have a basal rate built for a pump. We had the basal rate for MDI. So we really couldn't get Omnipod off to the right start. So it was starting from 0, and it was like, I don't know, what do you think? 0.01 for the rest of his life? We're like, that's not gonna do it. I think if we had treated the Omnipod 5 like it was a dumb pump, if we'd done manual for like a month and learned it and let it learn him, it would have been a lot better. Interesting. I think that would have been a lot better. If coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Well, it's just amazing how there's not that much different technology, right? There's 4 approved pumps now in the US, which is pretty cool, but we all have a different entry. Yeah. Everybody's experience is completely different. I mean, the first time we used an insulin pump, my son was 2.5. And I'll never forget, I was like, we're going to go to my mom's because we have to check him every 3 hours. No Dexcom. And it'll be a lot easier to do that around the clock if we're with her. So we got on a plane we were dummies. But we got there and we just, the first infusion set fell out. It was just a disaster. We almost went back to MDI.
Well, that's what I tell people all the time. They're like, that technology is amazing. I'm like, yes. If the Dexcom is in a good mood and the Omnipod 5 is in a good mood and everybody is functioning at their peak capacity and nothing's wrong with your insulin or your site, then it is all amazing technology that we don't have to think about. But if any of those things are messed up, then, it's a mess. I was telling Stacey, my husband, we were looking at our numbers and he's like, I just really want to get this, 5% low down to 3%. I really want to get this. And I'm like, he's like, I just don't know what's in our way. And I'm like, I don't know, babe. I think, hear me out here. I think it might be that our kid has diabetes. I think the problem could be that he, in fact, has diabetes. And that's probably why he's not 100% range all the time.
I know Felix, spoiler alert, had a great time at camp.
Oh, my God.
Last year. How did you find out about camp and, how did you manage that as a family? I know we have some people here who are thinking about it for the first time. Right back to our conversation. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. I love when I don't have to deal with a faraway mail order system, when I can just pick up diabetes supplies from the pharmacy. Omnipod is the only tubeless full-feature insulin pump available through the pharmacy. It makes it simple to pick up pods and insulin in the same place, and you avoid those high startup costs from traditional tubed insulin pumps. You simply pay as you pod. Remember, pharmacy means no commitment, and pharmacy means you can switch now, even if your tubed pump is under warranty. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions, visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections.
Oh, this is funny because this is another social media thing. There was this woman, do you remember the little viral video that went around of the kids calling it diabetes? Does anybody remember what I'm talking about? He was newly diagnosed and she was filming a lot of it and he was like, is diabetes? So, that's what we call it in our house now. He was diagnosed around the same time as Felix. So I got that experience. A lot of people sending me her oh, look at this lady. She's been, her son's Felix's age and she was living in Texas at the time and her son went to Camp Sweeney. So I already knew that I wanted him to go to camp. He went to Camp Homey Dakota. Yay! He went to Camp Homey Dakota that first summer. So he was diagnosed in April. He was in camp in June. I was not playing. I was like, you're going to camp. Because I heard from so many parents that were like, that's the key to helping them integrate it psychologically and not getting burned out. I was like, okay, don't say no more. I like my kids to go away all summer anyway. So this is great. But the problem is where we live, we went to one, you'll like this story. It's just so nice to be able to be in a room where I can tell you stories and y'all laugh at the right places because you understand how ludicrous some of these things are. Other people are like, why is that weird? I'm like, forget it. Nurses, my nurse friends are like they're like my backup type 1 diabetes moms because the nurses are like, ugh. We went to this like place in Kentucky. It's called the Camp for Courageous Kids. It's a lovely place, and it's just like a generally for handicapped kids. Like they have all this like nursing care in these special rooms. So they have a diabetes camp. They are not a diabetes camp. They have a diabetes camp. You feel me? And so we get in there, and they're like, they had s'mores on the schedule. And they start serving us all this sugar-free stuff, and they're like, we took the s'mores off. And this one mom, I mean, I'm assertive, but she was like, that's not how it works. They can have anything. They just have to have insulin, and all this sugar-free stuff is chock full of carbs. Y'all don't know what you're doing. So I was not going to send him there. That's probably the closest one to our house. Camp Homey, Dakota is about it's far. It's probably like a 7-8 hour drive. And it's only for a week. And when he went that summer, they were lacking in staff, and so they took it from a week to 3 days. So I was like, ugh. And so I heard about Camp Sweeney, which is like 3 weeks. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to haul him somewhere across the country, I would like him to stay a while. Everybody was like, you're going to send an 8-year-old to Texas for 18 days? I'm like, heck yeah, I'm going to. I mean, I was a child of divorce, and my mother let me fly by myself to California every summer to stay with my father. So I come by it honest. But my husband was like, oh, well, what if he calls and he's homesick and he wants to come home? And I'm like, have you met him? Like, no way, no how would this child get homesick. He's the youngest of 3 boys. He is tough as nails. Like, heck no. So my prediction was correct, obviously. We got there and he was like, can I stay for session 2? And I'm like, no. First of all, I don't have a couple $1,000s just laying around. Second of all, no. Never called us, never wrote home, like never. I was telling them at the table, my husband, bless his sweet heart, y'all, every day, they have a little radio show, and he was one of the DJs. And every day my husband would listen on the app. And then every day he checked the pictures. Like he was so in it with Felix. I got a shout out on the radio, probably because he knew I'd be mad, which was accurate. But my husband never did. And he came home and my husband was like, Felix, I missed you so much. I thought about you every day. And my son looked him right in the eye and said, Dad, I don't think I said the word dad once. Cold as ice. Cold as ice. But don't feel sorry for my husband because that is his little mini-me. He's the only one that likes sports. They have matching jerseys. Aww. After he told me not to be disappointed for not having a girl because that stuff didn't matter. And I was like taking pictures in the matching jerseys. I'm like, hypocrite.
I just want to say 2 quick things about camp. First, my son has gone to diabetes camp, since I think he was 7. You're supposed to be 8 to go to what is Camp Morris now, but he's a big dude. And when he went to Camp Kudos, which is our little day camp, they all said, "Oh, you're going next year to sleepaway camp." And he was like, "Yes, I am." And then they found out he was too young, and we were like, "No, he's going anyway because you told him." And they took him because he was ready. But he always says, he was younger, he would talk to other kids about camp, and he said the first night everybody is homesick. That's just what happens on Sunday night. But everybody's homesick, and you write a letter to your parents, and then you don't think about them again for the entire week. So
yeah,
don't
Camp
worry.
Sweeney has them write them at the end. I'm like, dude, I don't want the postcard once they're home.
Yeah, no.
Have them write these at the beginning.
And then the other thing about camp, a little self-promotion, is this coming Wednesday, I just don't want to forget to say, we're having a webinar. It's virtual. It's in the Facebook group, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, but I'm having a webinar with Anna Sabino, who's from Finding Smiles Coaching. It's not specific to any camp. It's general questions for you as parents about camp, things to think about, ways to get prepped. If you have any questions for us, we are huge, huge fans of camp.
Well, and it was so funny because I maybe got on some of those Facebook groups that I mentioned earlier, and then people were like, I hated it as a type 1 kid. I felt terrible. They run you high, all these horror stories. And so, but I was preparing myself. I was like, okay, he's just going to be high. It's okay. It's fine. He gets there. They have tighter control than we do because they know exactly what they're not swagging. They're like, I know exactly how many carbs was in this meal. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess all those fears were very much misplaced because I was so worried about that. Because you hear, especially people who went to camps when they were younger and you're like, oh my God, I don't want that experience for them. I don't want him to be high all the time. And my husband was so worried, see a previous mentioned worst case scenario. And I was like, babe, they run a diabetes camp with hundreds of kids. The stakes are awful high for them too. You know what I mean? They're invested.
Well, and you think about how much technology has changed. It was much safer to run them higher when no one had a CGM and you're swimming and doing all this stuff. So I understand that concern from the past, but it's pretty much past. So how old is Felix now?
He is going to be 9 in like 2 weeks.
I'm curious, and everybody's on their own parenting path. We don't, just because all our kids have diabetes doesn't mean we parent in the same way. But he seems like a kid, like I said, who doesn't want to sit still. How do you guys handle independence? Like at this age, it doesn't look like it's going to look when he's 19, but I'm sure there are times when he's not with you. I'm sure there are times when he wants to do things himself. Have you kind of started to think about that already?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking to his teacher and his school nurse and his team at the school. Like because next year in 4th grade, he rotates classes. Mm-hmm. And so we're like, you really are going to have to be paying attention to this yourself. We're working on like putting yourself in activity mode if you're going to go play outside, or, I don't know, don't run around the second we dose you. That'd be great. It's just little things like that. He's really good. He's kind of got the carb count down. He can get within ballpark. He asks if you're at our house, it's hilarious. Alexa, how many carbs are in an apple? Alexa, how many carbs are in an apple? She'll tell you too. It's not that far off, honestly. Alexa, how many carbs are in a peanut butter and jelly? And you can just hear him asking her all the time. And so he's getting really close because independence is very, very important to us. That's how we were raised. That's how I raised my older two. I'm not trying to send my sons off to somebody so they can just get taken care of by their wives or partners. That's not my goal in life. My husband knew how to do more things when we got married than I did, like paint and refinish furniture. I'm forever grateful to my mother-in-law for that. But my mother-in-law had 4 boys and a girl. She worked full time, so they had to know how to do stuff. I mean, my oldest 2 cook. Like Felix will cook too. He's in Boy Scouts. He'll learn all the things too. So that diabetes is just, I try to feel like a part of the whole as far as that is concerned.
Again, we all parent differently. How are your older 2 kids doing?
Oh, they're great. I mean, they know the oldest one he's the firstborn. He just wants to make me happy. I love firstborn children so much. He just loves me and just wants to be a good kid and please me. It's great. I don't know why they're not all like that. So he can dose. I leave Felix at home alone with him. Like he's super capable, super aware. He's awesome. Now the middle one, they just fight all the time. That doesn't have anything to do with diabetes. It's just that they fight all the time, him and Felix. That's just basic sibling rivalry. So I would not trust Amos to do anything with regards to diabetes. But I think they handled it really well. I remember they both got kind of freaked out when they had to do the test to make sure that they didn't have type 1 or any indicators for it. And I guess we have to do that again eventually. But overall, I think that they've handled it really well. I think part of it is because Felix already had a disability, so we had a lot of language around that. I was going to recommend something when you were talking earlier and you were saying parenting. If you are a type 1 mom, you don't have type 1, which I'm assuming is probably the majority of this group. There's an amazing book. Book is probably not big enough word for what it is. It's very long. It's more like 15 books in one. It's called Far From the Tree. Has anybody ever heard of this book? It's an incredible book. The author's name is totally escaping my brain right now because it's late at night. But Andrew Sullivan, I don't know. Far From the Tree. There's a young adult one. That's not it. It's a big, thick book. And it's about horizontal identities. Is this right? Yes. So often we will have vertical identities with our children. We will have the same race. We will have the same religion. We will have the same gender, whatever the case may be. This book is about when your child has an identity you do not share. There's a chapter about blind children and deaf children. There's a chapter about if your child has committed a crime such as murder. Listen, this is not a light read is what I'm telling you. I'm just telling you that up front. But I read it before Felix had type 1 diabetes, but it served me very well because I just think that there is a component of being in it with your child. But I have to catch myself, and I correct my husband a lot where I'm like, we don't know. We don't know. And I had that experience with Felix when he was really little. I remember one time he was struggling with something. And I said, I know it's really hard not being able to use your right hand how you want to. And he looked me dead in the eyes and he said, no, you don't. No, you don't. And and I have to keep that in the front of mind. And that book was really helpful to me to just read about parents who have to struggle with fundamental aspects of their child's experiences that they do not understand and they do not share. And it's really, really hard. And I think just sort of expanding that perspective. I do that a bunch on our show. When I can go high and get a historical perspective or a bunch of different perspectives, that helps me walk through the micro experience of my own life. And that book really helped me because it helped me zoom out and say, like, not only am I not alone among diabetic parents, but there are lots of parents who struggle with shepherding their children through something that they did not experience. So I highly recommend it.
I will definitely look into that. I got to tell you, one of the hardest things for me was when Benny was diagnosed at 23 months, we said our all the time. Like our diabetes, our endocrinologist, our, because it kind of was at that age, right? He wasn't doing anything for himself. And it took me a long time to recognize that that language was not helpful. You know, you have to really look at it as a completely different experience.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your kids have gone through TrialNet or another one of the.
One. Yes.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask you why? Did someone recommend that? Did you just want to do it? Did you?
They stuck it in that binder full of stuff they sent you out of the hospital with, and I was like, sure. It was the meanest, harshest. It was like those hardcore, spring-loaded, or whatever they're called. Oh man, it hurt. Lancets, thank you. They're mean. I think my middle one is still a little traumatized. But I found out my great or great-grandfather, him and all his siblings had type 1 diabetes. Actually, no, it was every sibling but one, and that one's all their children had it. Oh, wow. My grandmother loves to roll out this information way after it's useful. My middle child had a febrile seizure at like 4, which is pretty old for a febrile seizure. And she was like, oh yeah, your dad had one of those at 8. I'm like, that would have been helpful information. Oh, I don't know, about 2 months ago. She lives for that. But yeah, he had type 1 diabetes, which is, I'm assuming that's probably the genetic component. We don't know as much about my husband's genetics, but so since knowing that, I was definitely wanted to make sure.
I don't know. This is, again, we're talking almost 17 years ago when they used to talk about TrialNet in a way that was like, well, this is a study and you can't really do anything with it. Now they can do something with it. Yeah. It's pretty incredible to think about how far it's all come. But your kids were cool with that. They weren't like, I guess my question is, was it a heavy ask of them? Did they kind of understand it? Right back to our conversation. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. One of the things we love the most about the Dexcom G6 is that it helped Benny become more independent, but maybe not in the way you're thinking. Remote monitoring using the Dexcom Share and Follow let us be more confident letting him do more away from home with friends or at camp. But just the design change of G6 meant Benny could use one hand to insert the sensor. He was 14, he didn't want our help anymore. It was perfect timing. Dexcom G7 is even more simple to use and gives effortless diabetes management that fits into your lifestyle without the disruptions. Ease of use helps everybody, and I'm grateful the Dexcom product designers kept that in mind with G7. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo.
In my personal parenting journey, what I have found is that if I don't act like it's a big deal, they don't act like it's a big deal. I always say, babies are like puppies. They can smell your fear. So true of teenagers as well. And so, a lot of times with my kids, and with Felix sometimes still, I will say, I can see him getting spun up. And I will say, I am not freaking out. If I'm not freaking out, you don't need to freak out. If I'm freaking out, you should be worried. But I'm not freaking out. I will tell you when you need to be worried. And you don't need to be worried right now. And so I just kind of this is what we're doing. It's not a big deal. Moving on, so I think we just always have approached stuff like that. Even, the drive to Nashville that night, we were like, okay, here's the deal, Felix. This is where we're going. It's going to be fine. We're going to go get help. And my mom is like that too, very even keeled, doesn't go real high, doesn't go real low. And so that's how we kind of approach it with them. And they definitely feed off that. I think, even when my oldest was little, he never cried at a single shot. Again, the firstborn, middle one was not like that. Just because I told him, it's going to hurt, but then it'll be over. You'll be okay. And so, we kind of just have approached everything with that. And I think what animates me is this belief that sort of an orientation to, this is bigger than parenting for me. This is more about my ethics and my faith. That suffering can serve us, that it can play a role in our life. It does not have to just be a burden. Not that everything happens for a reason or any bullshit like that, but excuse my French. But that you have a choice, that bad things happen. I coined a term after Felix was diagnosed. At least I think I coined it. I haven't Googled it too deeply. that I had a friend of mine from high school come up to me at the soccer game or whatever after Felix got diagnosed, and he was like, "Hey, diabetes, did you just like feed him a bunch of sugar?" And I was like,
Yeah.
but I knew this guy, he's dumb but well-meaning, and so I was like, whatever. And so I didn't get mad, but I told my husband, I was like, the next person that says that to me, I'm going to say, no, it's just the chaos lottery and our ticket got pulled. You know, like, life is a chaos lottery. Sometimes your ticket gets pulled. And so I think that that's what I'm trying to teach my kids is like, this sucks, but we get to choose how we react to this. That's what we get to choose. We didn't get to choose diabetes, but we can choose how we react to it. That's how we think about it in our family.
So I'm going to open it up to questions, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I love questions. This is our favorite thing at Pantsuit Politics. People pay us to come talk. We're like, we're going to talk for 5 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
And I'm going to actually run around. I'm going to do my best Phil Donahue, which is a super old reference.
Listen, Phil Donahue started the game. Don't bust on Phil Donahue. He was the OG.
Oh, before Sally Jesse?
Sally Jesse was before Phil Donahue. Somebody Google that. That can't be right.
I'm just a little bit older than Ricky Lake. I'm a little bit younger than Ricky Lake. I could be Ricky Lake, right? Okay. Well,
listen, I was full Oprah. Oprah raised me every day at 4:00. That is still the worst part of the day because there is no Oprah.
Okay, before I turn it over to you guys, though, I do want to ask you a question. This is a little bit of a loaded question, but I could not wait to ask you to come speak at one of these Mom's Night Out events. But you said yes, which I was like, what? She's coming? Why did you say yes?
I wanted to go. I'd seen them and I thought, oh, I want to go. That looks so much fun. And I love being with people. I love speaking. I love, especially when you're in a community where there is that connection. So no, I was thrilled when you asked.
I'm so glad you're here. All right, anybody have a question or two? Anything?
I feel like this table was Googling it. Did I get the author's name right? I did get it right. Yes.
Oh, okay. I will. By the way, you guys are going to get an email next week with lots of fun stuff that we learned, and I will definitely put that book in the author.
I'm telling y'all, it is like a doorstop.
We'll do book club.
Yeah, it's 1,000 pages. I just read I just treated each chapter like its own book. So I was like, now I'm going to read this book about the parents of deaf children. Then I'm going to read a book about the parents of blind children. Y'all, the deaf children chapter is wild. It is wild.
Wow. No questions? You guys are going to make me ask her more stuff? Okay, I'm coming.
When you were talking about the book, it made me kind of think of a guilty thought that I sometimes have.
My favorite kind.
Well, being a mom with a child that has diabetes, sometimes I feel like I present it too much, and it's like guilty, you know? And so when you were talking about that book, it made me feel like, am I like taking his disease onto me? And is that something you kind of saw in that book? Do you get what I mean?
I do. Yeah. That's a great question.
I thought about it a lot. I still think about it a lot. Do y'all remember that movie about Temple Grandin with Claire Danes and Juliette Binoche? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Temple Grandin has autism. Yeah. And her mother's refrain, way back before this was like acceptable, cool, even understood, was different, not less. Different, not less. And so that's what I try to embody with him. You are different. It does not make you less. And so I don't protect him from it. I call him baby diabetic. That's like his nickname, which is probably bad. But I'm like, where's baby diabetic? But I try to integrate that into who he is, not compartmentalize it. Does that make sense? Because that's who he is. Both of his diabetes and his hemiplegia are a fundamental part of who he is. And I don't ignore that it's different, but I don't treat it as less. And I think it's a hard line, and I'm not saying I get it right all the time, but I don't the mantle of I try not to own his disability as if it is mine. It's not mine to carry. I mean, it's not that I don't manage it and that it's not stressful and all those things, but I really don't. I guess I would say this. Between my second son and Felix, I actually lost a pregnancy at 20 weeks. And I remember vividly my friend telling me, he drew me this little diagram. Because I was a stay-at-home mom at the time and I had gotten really wrapped up in the identity of being a mom. And something went wrong. And so my brain was like, well, this was your job and you screwed it up. And he said, when you're identities and your self, there's a Venn diagram, but when they become merged, you're in really dangerous territory. You have to see your worth separate from being a mother, being a wife, being anything. Like those being a podcaster, like that cannot be. I had to tap my mama Oprah, who told me all the time when I was young that I was worthy as a child of God, and that was enough. And I was like, right, Oprah taught me this. I just said, tap it again. So that's what I try to be really careful about, is not making those identities who I am, a part of my self-worth, instead of those are roles. That's what it was. That was the Venn diagram. It was roles versus identity. It was roles versus identity. I just try to watch that with myself. I mean, paradoxically, that sounds a little opposite of what I said about Felix, to integrate these. But that's not a role. I mean, being a diabetic and being a hemiplegic is not a role. That is who he is. But being a mom of a diabetic does feel more like a role to me than an identity.
If I could just add too, and I think my perspective is a little bit, I don't know, funny on this, considering I have events now that are all around diabetes, and I've written a couple books about being the world's worst diabetes mom. But I do think it's super important to look at the role and the identity. That's a fabulous way to put it. And you have to have, especially as your kids get older, a life and passions and things that you want to do that are part of your identity. Diabetes can be so all-consuming. And there are seasons for different things. There are ages at which you have to really be much more part of it. And there are ages when you have to pull back. So I would say, nobody beats on us more than we do, right? We're just so hard on ourselves. So I get that guilt of like, am I taking this too much on myself? But I really do try to keep all this stuff separate from Benny. Like his picture's not up here. I mean, he would love that. He'd think that'd be really funny. But this is mom's night out, right? Yeah. So I think it's such a good question. It's something I think we struggle with as moms without diabetes, but diabetes amplifies it.
Well, and I also think it's just dangerous because it's like a recipe for resentment. When I am the meanest to my children is when I'm like trying to do something for them and they don't like appreciate it enough. And I'm like, you ungrateful little, and so like with diabetes, like if you're sweating it all the time, I feel like diabetes is always like just a manifestation of other parenting lessons, like it's just the same things only on like level 11, the same things you have to learn and kind of teach yourself. It's not Q&A, it's conversation time. How about that?
Perfect. I just want to say thank you because I am a person with diabetes, not a parent of a diabetic child or a child with diabetes. That's the whole part of it. Oftentimes, as a person with diabetes, coming into a space of caregivers for somebody with diabetes, I have to say that it is so refreshing to hear you say that there's a difference between identity and roles. Mm-hmm. So it is a part of my identity. I can't separate myself from it. Diabetes follows me around like a lost puppy dog wherever I go. Mm-hmm. And I think nights like tonight are fabulous for caregivers and moms of kids with diabetes because you guys absolutely need to be able to step away from it and take a breath and relax. I wish I could, but I'm so appreciative of Stacy for having a night like this so that you guys can do that. And I really appreciate you just saying it because that is a concept that is often overlooked.
Thank you so much.
And
thank you for being here.
Thank you. I also, look, I can put on my Pantsuit Politics hat here. There's like a super gendered situation happening with all of this when you're a mom and the expectations. I mean, people get burned out mothering and they just got like kids with no diabetes. So, I mean, you add something like that, it just heightens the expectation. But, I think the more that you can be aware of those expectations, doesn't Brené Brown have a whole thing about like unexpressed expectations and how that's like the most dangerous territory to be in? And I think that's very, very true when you're mothering and when you're in the sort of, if you add in any additional thing on top of that caregiving role. Caregiving is a beast. It just is.
I like this running around.
So I want to thank you because my son also has chronic health issues other than diabetes, and it really does make things harder, but it's also great to see him overcoming and becoming more independent, even though I'd like it to go a little faster. But what really hit me was when you said, I'm not freaking out, so you don't need to freak out. because I'm a freaker outer.
So since we have a talk show theme, I'll be Dr. Phil. How's that working for you?
Not well. Not well. I'm going to heed your advice.
I talk about this all the time, that one time my grandmother, we were gossiping. I was going to try to say it nicer, but we were gossiping about somebody else. And she said, well, they're fearful people. We're not a fearful people. That's not who we are as our family. We're not fearful people. And just like naming that, I think back about that moment all my life. All the time that my Meemaw just said, we're not a fearful people. And so that's what I just try to embody for my children. Not that there are not scary things, but you know what we say, I'm going to tear up again. I cry a lot. Y'all don't listen to my podcast. This is not any reason to be alarmed. I cry on like almost every episode. The thing we say on Pantsuit Politics is together is all we have. And that's what I try to teach my kids. It's not that we won't face scary things. It's that we will face them together. It's not that we will have the answer every time, but we will try to figure it out together. And that's, you know, my mom and my grandmother really embodied that for me. It's not that things won't happen that will be scary. I mean, I'm a survivor of a school shooting when I was a junior in high school. I think even to that my children, they've had a couple like very scary drills at their school that has this triggered all these anxiety for some of their peers that they don't have. I think because they live with someone who walks around every day and says, I face this thing that everybody tells you is the scariest thing that can possibly happen to you as a teenager, and here I am telling you about it as your mother. It's just a different orientation to sort of the stuff out there. And I mean, and it's infused. I mean, that's really truly what we do on our podcast. It's not, I don't want you to walk away going, oh my God, it's a dumpster fire. What are we going to do? You know, like that's not fun for anybody. And so I know there's a lot of people that make a lot of money telling people that, but that's not how I want to live my life. And so always just trying to say, like, what can we handle? What do we understand? What do we not? What can we figure out? What is unfigure-outable? And can we just say that? I don't know. There's power in I don't know.
I just want to get the wording right, that all we have is together?
Together is all we have.
Together is all we have. I love that.
Yeah, it's good for a podcast community. It's good for a family. That's good. Because that is true. I mean, that's just what the work of being a human being is, right? I think the power. I think all the time of what you said about Still Magnolias and how Shelby didn't have a community. Yeah. Shelby. And I can cry about that because she was a real person.
Well, real quick. I actually went on her podcast and we talked about Still Magnolias among many things, but it was pointed out to me by the incredible Melissa Lee. And if I don't know, well, I'll send you some stuff about Melissa Lee. She's a really good community advocate. And she pointed out to me the scariest thing about Steel Magnolias was, when you think about it, the only person without a community is the person who has type 1 in that movie. And if Shelby had just had one other person in her life who knew anything about living with diabetes, that movie would have turned out a lot differently. It is based on a true story.
It is.
It's no judgment. It was such a different time.
And also, my favorite irony about that movie is it's a story about women and women's friendship, and it was written by her brother. Her brother is the one who wrote it. I love Still Magnolias. But I think there's these levels, right? I mean, I think having an intimate partner, like a close partnership, is a level of connection that eases some of that anxiety. Having close friends. But I also think what you're doing here, this sort of broad-based community, you know, I live in a small town. I feel very supportive, you know, like these are not my close friends, but I have a lot of acquaintances. I think sometimes that's where we're missing. But lots of people have close friends. Lots of people have partners. Not a lot of people have that like broad base of community. And I think like diabetes, that's the diabetic community is an incredible place to find that sort of broader base that it just feels like a net. And I think our animal brains, that unlock something for us. I think we need to feel like that. Like there are people around me who would come to my aid if I had a problem. That's very settling, I think, for us. So I think about that too a lot.
I think we probably have time for one more question.
Now we're just really getting going here,
We can stay. I mean, until they kick us out of the room.
No, mine was just a little bit of a comment too, kind of back to what you were saying that was super helpful for me the night that my son was diagnosed, back to what you're saying. And my son was super sick, DKA, and I'm a healthcare provider and I missed it. So I was feeling really dumb. And the night that he was in the ICU, the PICU doctor stayed up with me all night long, and he is a type 1 diabetic and his kids are type 1 diabetics, but he gave me the best analogy. It was kind of on line with what you're thinking that I thought would be helpful for everybody in this room too, but he called it the backpack analogy. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but he said to think of chronic illness, but type 1 diabetes specifically, as a backpack that gets put on your child. And he said, you didn't put this on your child and you can't take it off. And it's theirs to carry. It's not your backpack, it's theirs. But there's a lot of things that can help take stuff in and out of the backpack. There's a lot of bricks you can put in and take out, and technology can really help lighten the load of the backpack. Dexcom, CGM pumps, and all those things have come a long way and helped. Oh,
As
there's
if
a
on cue.
And so you can help lighten that load, and there are going to be seasons of life that make it heavier or lighter. But he was like, and this is, I'm in the PICU thinking, and he's already telling me if we hadn't come in that night, he wouldn't have been here like on Monday, so in the heat of the moment, and he's like, look at my face and remember this, forever. Like, you didn't put this on your child and you can't take it off. And it's his backpack and not yours. And it was similar to what you were saying.
Just the chaos lottery, man.
Yeah, which was super helpful. So
yeah,
that's been helpful for me to remember.
Did you say you're a healthcare provider?
I am. And I am a family nurse practitioner in family medicine and missed my own kids' diagnosis.
But I just want to say, I'm so glad you said that. This is what I call the Holy Spirit at work, because I'm from Kentucky. But because when we were talking a minute ago about caregivers, I really wanted to say, and shout out to the people who caregiving is their profession, because that's a whole other level on top of parenting a child with diabetes. If you're a teacher, if you're a nurse, if you're a healthcare provider, and then that's your job, I hope you have a therapist. I love therapy, because I think that's a whole other level on top of everything else that we're talking about, especially identities versus roles.
Beth, did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. We got to get to it. This is Beth Silvers.
Oh,
the other Beth Silvers.
Amazing.
I was gonna give you a shout out a little bit later. Should
it.
I do it now, or you want to ask your question first?
Either way.
Okay. So Beth is a Jocelyn medalist. I don't know if you all have seen her or know what that is. So the Jocelyn medalist is a study and a club, but you have to have diabetes for 50 years before you can belong. She has lived with type 1 for 60 years, 62 years. What a powerhouse.
That's incredible.
And it's her Dexcom that went off, which was really funny. It wasn't even one of the moms.
Funny.
Go ahead, Beth.
That was going to be my general comment. So listening to all of you as parents of children with diabetes is very, very powerful. But coming from the other side, I was diagnosed at age 5 in 1962. There were no meters. There were no pumps. There were no endocrinologists. There were no registered dietitians. There were no certified diabetes educators. My mother was told, if she looks pale, give her something sweet. If she lays down or gets sleepy, you might want to walk her around the block. That was all we had. My diet sheet was one piece of paper, 8.5 by 11, that had a list of A vegetables and B vegetables. You had to make sure you ate one from each group every day. And that was all. Have a good day. We changed my insulin dose once a year when I went to the pediatrician to check my blood sugar, because that was the only time we knew what my blood sugar was. We did urine sugars by testing a St. Benedictine solution with a chemical solution my mother did on top of the stove. She boiled glass syringes to give me beef pork insulin. That was not very safe. By the grace and the mercy of my Lord Jesus Christ, my Savior and Redeemer, I am here, alive, well, and kicking. I thrive with my diabetes. I do not live with it. As Sarah has said, it is part of who I am, but it is not who I am. When you look at me, I don't want you to say, oh, she's the diabetic who's had it for 62 years, poor thing. Look at what I've done and what I've accomplished in the 62 years. I served as a diabetes educator and a dietitian for 42 of those years. Because I had this condition, I thought, maybe want to share some things with other people. So I did, and I've helped some people, I hope. But my one last conclusion is, y'all are all doing a great job. Hold on to that. Believe that. And you are doing the best. The best not be the same as everybody else in the room, and that's okay. And the final thing is normal. How many of you have heard normal? We're learning the new normal since COVID. Excuse my French, but that's bullshit. Normal is a setting on your dryer. We're not going to find it in this life or before COVID, either one.
Beth, thank you so much. You're the best. I did not know I was going to have to beep out half of this podcast.
I love
your
it.
Language.
That reminds me that she said that. When she said COVID, I was already thinking about this. At the end of 2020, I think, yeah, Time is a flat circle. I saw a tweet the other day, and it was like what was it? It was like 2015 to 2010 nostalgia. 2016 to 2019, 2016, 2020 to 2023 plague. I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. At the end of 2020, we had a podcast where we were talking about the pandemic and going through it all. And I said, I cried, surprise. And I said, I just kind of did this plea, and I just said, listen to me. If you can hear my voice, we did the best we could. We did the best we could. We did the best we could. And one of my listeners, who's a graphic artist, sent me this beautiful little 8.5 print that says, we did the best we could. And it's on my wall in my office, and it is applicable way outside of COVID. We did the best we could. We're doing the best we can. That's all you can do. That's all you can ask for. I think about all that time. This is the second time I brought up Brené Brown. She's a point in her book where she says people are doing the best they can. Now, some people's best are dangerous and they belong in jail. But some people, but everybody's doing the best they can. And she says something to her husband where she's like, do you really believe that? And he's like, I don't know if I believe that literally every person is doing the best they can. But I know I like who I am when I try. I like who I am when I try. When I just try to remember I'm doing the best they can, and I'm going to believe that they are too. And I think especially when you're talking about caregiving or just life in general, it's always an important lesson to learn. I can't wait to tell my kid you got your blood sugar tested once a year. I'm going to film it for you because he'll probably cuss. He's 8, it's fine.
The lack of knowledge is powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Amen.
Oh, yeah. You get the Dexcom and you're like, why did I beg for this thing?
Lord. All right, we're going to do a few more things, but everybody, Sarah Stewart Holland, thank you so much. Oh, my goodness. And I don't cry a lot. I
love it. When I make Beth cry, I'm killing it. So I'm excited you're not a crier and I made you cry. It's good. You release stress hormones through your tears. Did you know that?
Well, I will tell you, when he was diagnosed, I felt like I kind of hardened my heart. I've talked about this on my podcast a few times, because I don't know how else I was going to chase my 23-month-old down and stab him, 10 times a day and do all that nonsense. And I was like I wouldn't even try an infusion set. I'm like, if this sucker hurts, I'm never doing one on him. So I never did it. And I do feel like it's kind of sad. Like I kind of hardened up about things like that. But you all tonight.
Listen, I'm sorry. I know you keep trying to wrap up, and I keep telling all my stories. I can't help myself. So we have this book club at church. It's a really good book. It's called More Than a Mom, and it's about it's sort of like not self-care, but sort of self-care 101 is how I would describe it. She's got some good stuff in there. We're at this book club. We're talking about this book. One of the women in the book club says, basically, in a nutshell, well, if other people wanted their children to be, it was about friendship. And she was like, it's just struggles. It's hard when I'm trying to make friends because other people don't want their kids to succeed as bad as I want my kids to succeed. I swear. She's a lovely woman, but that is what she said. And I was like, oh boy. And so we were talking about this, and she's like, we were talking about well, you have to let your kids make their own mistakes. And she was like, well, not if their mistakes could get them killed, or what if their mistakes get them killed? And me, being the dark diabetic mother in the group, went, yeah, that could happen. I was just and everybody was like, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. Y'all don't have to think about that. Cool, I do. So just know, yeah, that could happen. But everybody was like, dark, Sarah. And I'm like, sorry.
Well, we almost ended on a really positive and squishy note.
Sorry. Then I brought us right back down.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
You can find more information about Sarah, and I'll link up my appearance on her show in the show notes over at diabetes-connections.com. Also, lots of information about Mom's Night Out. These are the conversations we're having at these events. I really hope you can join us, whether it's in Chicago in April, we will be in Denver in September, Philadelphia in October, and we are thinking about 2025 right now. But I hope you can join us at one of these events. They're just fabulous. I really feel like our community needs something like this. And, the moms who attend can tell you that they all love it. It's just an amazing feeling to leave one of these events. I mean, as a mom of a kid with type 1, not just the organizer, I leave just feeling so much better, even after all these years. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions, sometimes these live-to-tape events. are kind of tricky, so John, I always appreciate you. And thank you for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
As you're managing life with diabetes, EdgePark is here to support you on your health journey. Discover convenience and peace of mind with EdgePark, your trusted supplier in diabetes management supplies. EdgePark has a wide variety of pump and CGM solutions from top brands to fit your unique needs. Plus, EdgePark works with most insurance companies and handles the paperwork to navigate insurance complexities for you and make the ordering process as seamless as possible. You work hard to manage your diabetes. Let EdgePark take care of the rest. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the EdgePark logo.